Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Link Live with Career Club. My name is Bob Goodwin, and I'm the founder of Career Club. You're welcome to check us out on the web at Career Club, where we're helping people find careers that matter to them using sales methods and tools in career search. This is a live, so obviously you've got the opportunity to comment, and we would encourage you and welcome you to do that. I also want to say a quick thank you to Heather, who is, as I always say, the brains behind the operations, making sure this all works great. But I want to just sort of jump into it because I'm over the moon with our guest today. The title of today's episode is Lessons in Leadership, and I really can't think of a better guest to have on than our guest today, retired General Ben Hodges. Ben, welcome.
Thank you very much, Bob, for the privilege.
No, this is really an honor to have you on, sir. So thank you. We're going to ask you a couple icebreaker questions here in just a second. But would you mind just kind of explaining your role today and then your last role in the Army when you were the commanding general in Europe?
Sure. I retired from the Army in January 2018. My last job in the Army for 3 years, I was the commanding general of U.S. Army Europe, headquartered in Wiesbaden, Germany. I was responsible for all U.S. land forces in Europe during that time. And just prior to that, I was the commander of NATO's Allied Land Command, which was based in Izmir, Turkey, for 2 years, 2012 to 2014. Since retiring 4 years ago, and that time has really flown by, I continue to live here in Germany, in Frankfurt, Germany. I work for a think tank that focuses on Central and Eastern Europe. And I also am the NATO Senior Mentor for Logistics. I do some minor consulting. I look for every opportunity to talk to university students and civic organizations to talk about the U.S.-European relationship, why it's important for the U.S. to be in NATO, those kind of things. But my favorite thing that I work on is this project about the first South Carolina Volunteers of African descent, the formation of this unit in the U.S. Army in 1862 marks the beginning of continuous service by African-American soldiers in the U.S. Army. And so that's a project that I do with an old friend.
Well, that's wonderful. And thank you so much for that. We typically start off these episodes with a little bit of an icebreaker, and you've kind of started to touch on some of it. But just starting off, where were you born and raised?
So born in Jacksonville, Florida, way back in 1958. I was raised in Tallahassee, Quincy and Tallahassee, there in North Florida.
Awesome. Well, you had me with your Southern accent at the very beginning, and just a little bit. This is a great question. Where did you go to college?
I went to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Graduated in 1980. Very proud of our class. We were the first class to have women, and you can be sure it was hell for those women that started in the summer of 1976. It was really, really hard. So I'm proud of them. And we also were the first class to have an African-American as the cadet first captain, Vince Brooks, my roommate. I made him everything he is. And, of course, Vince went on to retire as a four-star after commander of U.S. forces in Korea. So that's my West Point class, and we're still very close, all of us.
Well, you should be very proud. And I've already heard diversity come out of this twice so far in your talk. And, we'll pick up a little bit at the tail end of this to explore a little bit more about your passion project. Do you mind just sharing a little bit about your family?
Sure. My wife is an amazing German-American woman, doctor of history that is a consultant herself. My daughter has my three perfect grandchildren. They're at West Point now. Her husband is a U.S. Army officer. Wow. And serves on the faculty there at the Military Academy. He was also captain of the Army football team a few years ago, although he never got to beat Navy in his 4 years. So he's got to live with that the rest of his life. Wow. And then my son is a beast of a man. He's about 5 inches and 30 pounds heavier than me and 5 inches taller. And he lives there in Gainesville, Georgia, working with my brother-in-law in traffic control systems.
Goodness. Well, you've got quite the accomplished family. That's no big surprise. So we had discussed last night, given everything that's going on with the headlines and obviously your expertise in the topic, do you mind just maybe sharing for a couple of minutes for our listeners what's kind of going on in Ukraine, maybe a little bit about how we got here and what the issues are and maybe how you see it playing out?
Well, I actually literally just finished participating in a 2-hour hearing in front of the House Oversight Committee and their National Security Subcommittee of the House Oversight Committee. It was a virtual hearing, of course, alongside former U.S. Ambassador Mike McFaul and Dr. Andrea Kendall Taylor and former U.S. Ambassador Rick Grinnell. I'd say three broad strokes about what's happening. This is a very, very dangerous situation with what Russia is doing in and around Ukraine. But this is not something new. This has been building up really since Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, and it's just continued under President Putin to undermine European sovereignty and to try and create division across Europe. So it's a dangerous situation. But I do not believe that there is going to be a massive attack. And I say that because I think the Kremlin is actually believes they can accomplish their objective by crushing Ukraine's economy and causing the collapse of the government of President Zelensky. And they're doing that with this deployment of over 100,000 troops and most of their navy in the Black Sea. I would liken it to a boa constrictor that is just squeezing and squeezing and squeezing. I was in Kyiv about 2 weeks ago, and you could already begin to see the effects of this pressure. Airlines were beginning to curtail their number of flights going in and out of Ukraine, as well as the amount of time they would spend on the ground. American businesses were going to the head of the American Chamber of Commerce asking, should we leave? That was 2 weeks ago. And of course, the administration has now encouraged all Americans to leave. Understandable and probably prudent, but this has exacerbated the pressure on Ukraine's economy as well, which of course is not lost on the Kremlin. And I really do think that they believe they can accomplish what they want without having to attack, just the threat of attack. At the same time, I believe that Belarus is really what's on the menu. We're going to see a formal annexation, if you will, of Belarus. President Lukashenko, I think, is going to be sent into retirement. Nobody in Europe will care because this guy is so terrible, and he's not a legitimately elected president anyway. And so the Russians are going to trade him out for their own guy. And then you can almost anticipate the world sighing relief. Lukashenko's gone. Russia did not invade Ukraine. Let's get back to normal jogging. And that's exactly what the Kremlin hopes for. So one of the outcomes of all this, hopefully, will be that we pay much more attention to the greater Black Sea region and recognize that economic development there, diplomatic support for nations in the region is an important part of competition against Russian aggression.
Yeah. So one last question on that. That was phenomenal. And I just learned about 5 different things that I didn't know before. So thank you. If I understand it correctly, one of Putin's demands is that NATO basically permanently deny Ukraine even the option for membership. Is that your understanding? Is that likely to happen, that Ukraine would be denied membership into NATO?
Well, he has said that repeatedly. But that's not really his objective. I mean, what he wants, of course, is to reestablish kind of the old Russian Empire and to have this sphere of influence all around Russia, which would include, by the way, most of Central and Eastern Europe, down through the Black Sea and the Caucasus, and out into Central Asia. The notion that this is all about the threat of NATO against Russia is a total fairy tale. But he needs some kind of thing to hang his hat on and to tell his own population to justify what he's doing, and also, of course, to distract them from the terrible situation and conditions inside Russia. Now, I would say that it will be quite some time before Ukraine would ever become a member of NATO. But there's a principle at stake here that Russia does not get to determine the foreign policy of other countries, as if this was the 18th century, back when Russia and Prussia and the Austrians divided Poland amongst themselves, for example. Not in the 21st century. And I think what President Putin really fears is not NATO. What he fears is our nations on his periphery, like Ukraine, becoming more and more democratic, the talent of young people being unleashed, and people becoming prosperous. That's what he fears, is not the expansion of NATO, but the expansion of liberal democracy and prosperity, because then his own population is going to wonder, why don't we have that? I mean, we're smarter than them. Why don't we have that? Instead, Ukraine is beginning to look like Poland and Estonia. That's what he really fears.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you so much. And I know that was a little bit of a diversion from our original topic here, but it's very top of mind for people, and you're a unique resource to shed some perspective. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it is. If I can say, it is about leadership, though, because this is about American leadership. The United States does not have the luxury to choose which threat is out there. It can't be, we're going to turn our back on Europe so we can focus on China, because our economic prosperity as well as our security depends on Europe being stable, secure, and prosperous. And we don't have enough capability to do everything, so we need allies. And most of our best and most reliable allies come from Europe, as well as Canada and Australia. So this is important, and it requires American leadership. And every time we turn our back, then something bad happens. So I think this is about leadership too.
Well, so thank you. Point well made. So then I'll just build on that. Then one of the things that we had talked about in the call that we had a couple weeks ago, kind of preparing for this, was you were sharing the importance of purpose. And I think even as you were describing some of the dynamics of what's going on in Russia and how he kind of wants them to not be able to see, like, there's a better life out there for you folks, but I don't want you to know about it. Could you just talk into leadership? I mean, maybe you can put it in the context of American leadership's and our purpose, as kind of a world superpower, or if you want to bring down to, the level of, as people leading other people. And just the importance that you were sharing with me a couple of weeks ago on just having purpose and feeling ownership in what you're being called to do.
I really do think that the first principle of leadership is being willing to accept responsibility. I mean, all of us are going to have different levels of experience and talents and personalities, but regardless of whether you're a backslapping, real loud, gregarious, or the quiet type, physical, emotional, intellectual leader, it's about accepting responsibility and being willing to own versus blame somebody else for the problems. I always was impressed with a young officer or a sergeant that would, in the middle of a really messed up situation, would say, "Sir, that's mine. I'm going to fix that," or "That was my fault." And I'm old enough to recognize when it wasn't really that guy's fault. But I saw what he was doing was trying to, first of all, everybody wanted to get out of the room because of the ass chewing that was going on. And so I'll end this. I'll accept the blame so we can get back to work. And it made me feel better, because then I know, okay, somebody's going to grip this thing. But then all the other younger people would say, "Wow, did you see the major? He stood up and took one from the boss." And so it elevated his credibility as a leader as well. So accepting responsibility. I had a boss one time tell me, he said, if you're an officer in the U.S. Army, it is your job, no matter where you are, to take charge of all government property in sight. And of course, what he was talking about, if you walked up on a bad situation, whether it's in combat or in garrison somewhere, as an officer, you're expected to own it. You're going to fix it, take charge of it. And you can't blame circumstances. And I have this rock from the site of where George Washington crossed the Delaware, one of the most important moments in the history of our country. You can be sure that George Washington and his soldiers did not have all the resources that they needed. I mean, I would be willing to bet that the boats that they used were not in top condition, nor did his soldiers have proper equipment and shoes. But yet, he said, all right, we have to do this. And that's the example for me, is accepting responsibility.
So let's build on that for a minute, because one of the principles that you shared with me was this notion of mission command. Could you describe that, please?
A mission command is what the Army calls how we expect leaders to lead. And it really boils down to telling your subordinates, here's the mission, here's the purpose for what we're doing, and I expect you, no matter what, to get there to that purpose. So I'm going to give you the task. Let me use a combat situation. Seize the hill in order to protect the river crossing that's coming behind you. So the key is the purpose. Protect the river crossing that's coming. And if you get there to the hill and you realize, well, I can't protect the river crossing from here, I can't see anything, but over here is a better place, then in mission command, you would expect the subordinate to retask themselves to go to the other place, as long as they still accomplish the purpose. Mm-hmm. Now, that sounds relatively simple, but it takes a lot. First of all, it takes trust. The subordinate has to be confident, okay, General Hodges told me to do this, but I'm going to do something different because I can see here on the ground a better way to do it. And I'm confident that the general is not going to crush me when I do something different, as long as I accomplish the purpose that he gave me. At the same time, I've got to have trust in all of my subordinates. If I give them that flexibility, in fact, the expectation, I've got to know that, okay, when Lieutenant Bob gets out there, he's probably will make a better decision once he sees for himself what's happening. And then I would expect you to retask yourself. So, of course, you have to practice this a lot in training, kind of like a football player getting snaps, getting reps to practice making decisions. And inevitably, when you're dealing with less experienced people, you're going to make mistakes. So you want to build up their confidence, but also they've got to know that if they make a mistake, unless it's integrity or willful negligence, if they make a mistake trying to carry out your intent, then you're going to sweep up broken glass and keep putting them in there. That's what mission command is all about.
Phenomenal. And one of the things that you were alluding to is the commander needs to be able to communicate the intent, right? So it seems like it's also very incumbent on leadership to be very clear with what we're trying to accomplish, as well as the subordinate accepting responsibility for the accomplishment of that objective. And again, as you said, sort of having the freedom then to be flexible as the situation would dictate. Just if you wouldn't mind kind of speaking to a little bit about communication style and being an effective communicator when you're in that leadership position and trying to communicate that mission command.
So this is one of the harder parts of leadership, is to be able to articulate what you want. And your audience is not going to be 10 other CEOs or 10 other generals or whatever. It's going to be a full range of people of different experiences, different outlooks. And so, of course, you always wanted to build what we call a common tactical mindset, where people generally understood the processes, not automatons, but there was a framework. Just like, again, go back to great football players. They almost kind of look at each other and know what the other one's thinking. So that's a part of it as well. That comes through practice and repetition, not just by declaration or writing some document when you start off. But you have to recognize who your audience is. I mean, that really is, in addition to having something to say, who is it that you're trying to communicate to or with, recognizing that everybody will receive information in different ways, different filters, and so on. So that tells you right there, you got to make it as clear as possible, and you got to say it as often as possible. And so I had 3 or 4 points that I made every day wherever I was, whether I was out visiting a unit in somewhere in Germany or in Poland or visiting our allies in Lithuania, or if it was in meetings in garrison or when I would communicate back to the Pentagon. I always stuck with the 3 or 4 key themes, not bumper stickers, because bumper stickers sound like bumper stickers, but being able to convey critical things and then over and over and over was an important thing for me to be a successful communicator. And it doesn't matter what's up in here if you can't get it out, if you can't say it or you can't write it, then it doesn't matter what you have up in here. And that's an important part. And the last thing I would say is, you have to develop techniques to make sure that your message got through. One of the basic things that we would do, of course, we have what we call a back brief. After you issue the order, for example, or give to lay out a new policy about something, then you kind of go around the room and say, all right, tell me, what was it I just told you to do? Or what do you think I'm expecting you to do? And if they don't come back to you with clear understanding, that's my fault, not their fault. It's my fault. So then I would work on that. And then, of course, we would go through rehearsals before a big operation. Again, a chance for everybody to kind of play back. Here's what I'm being expected to do, and it's a way to sort that out. That takes time, of course. That takes time, and then you got to have people that can help you with that too. In the Army, you always have a sergeant major, an old sergeant that's been around for a long time, that kind of goes out and listens and can come back and say, sir, you need to go down and see this unit again, or that commander, they don't get it. You need to kind of follow up there.
Well, that's interesting, because those last things you said were all about listening too. So being a great communicator isn't just what comes out. It's also looking for that feedback, listening, refining as you need to. I want to harken back to one thing, because this is so important. You were talking about, people not being afraid to fail and taking ownership for failing, but the only thing they didn't tolerate was either willful disobedience or lack of integrity. I'd like for you to just talk about the integrity piece for a minute, because, sometimes, depending on what the pressure is that we feel, to just, I got to go take that hill, and like I just got to go take it by hook or by crook. And you've got the highest stakes at play in a military operation. And yet integrity is one of those, core tenets that has to be abided by. I was just wondering if you could speak to that point for a minute.
So I had an old sergeant tell me one time, he said, sir, everything good in the Army begins with accountability. And of course, what he was talking about is knowing where all of your people are, knowing where every bit of your equipment is, especially weapons, sensitive items, night vision devices, radios, those kinds of things, and knowing the status of all of those people and all of that equipment. And that's hard. And if you have accountability of everything and everybody, not just where they are, but their status,
yep.
That says a lot about the quality of your chain of command. So I always invested a lot of time into ensuring we had accountability of people and stuff, and that paid off in 2002, excuse me, right as we were getting ready to invade Iraq, and we had a terrorist attack hit our camp in Kuwait, and you can imagine 4,000 soldiers at nighttime, and people running around, and we thought we were under external attack, but it was actually an insider attack, and I was so proud that how quickly, out of all these troops inside this darkened camp out in the middle of the desert, how quickly they were able to get accountability of everybody. It was amazing how fast. And that's how we figured out who the insider was and were able to capture that person. That was a direct reflection on how fast everybody got accountability. That always stuck with me. But not everything is as dramatic as that. A lot of this is about there's safety involved. If you report a location, that's information that's used so that you don't get shot by your own artillery, for example, or aircraft. So the point is trust. When somebody says, I am at this location, you know that they're there. And one of the symptoms of how bad things have become in our Army back towards the end of Vietnam is that leaders, including officers, were so reluctant to take their soldiers into dangerous situations is that they would go outside the wire a few hundred meters, and then they would send in false reports and then come back in later. This was not widespread, but it happened enough that it's part of the memory of the Army from the end of Vietnam, and that is another reason why we put so much emphasis on integrity, so that you have trust. And then finally, back to accountability. The taxpayer entrusted us with literally hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment and the lives of their sons and daughters. And so you get to be able to look the taxpayer in the eye, parents in the eye. This is about integrity. And so this is one of the central pillars of leadership because of that.
Thank you. So, one of the other areas that obviously is very core to leadership is people development. And as you said, like you're dealing with the full spectrum of people from, their backgrounds and education, training, whatever it is. What were some of the key things that you looked for that, like, this young lady, this young man, they've got it? And how would you go about identifying talent and then developing talent?
Well, first of all, you have to believe in talent. I mean, you have to believe that everybody has something. And so for me, the very simplistic construct was that everybody can be developed to the next level. I mean, if you're terrible, you can be brought up to mediocre. If you're mediocre, you can be brought up to okay, and so on. So everybody that I had, no matter what their rank was or what their position was, I always believed that there was something in them because they had survived getting through basic training or whatever their commissioning source was. So they had demonstrated something. And so I thought, all right, well, I'm going to find it. I'm going to give them opportunity. Now, you can't just have endless opportunity. I mean, you're still the Army, or you're still the business, or whatever organization you run in. There is obviously some sort of limit, but helping people find where they are good is a part of that. And I used 3 or 4 characteristics when I would do my assessments of the officers that I had to formally evaluate over the years to help make my recommendation to the Army on who should be promoted. And there was a baseline assumption that they were physically fit, that they had moral courage and physical courage. So that was the baseline. If you didn't have those 3 things, then obviously you had no potential for promotion in the Army. And I wouldn't want you in the Army. So how did I separate and pick those who really should be promoted? And the first thing that I always looked for was judgment. Were they able to kind of see through all the clutter and really understand what was most important, what needed to be done? Because there's, no matter what business you're in, there's about 1 million things you can get caught up on. You start following, it's hard to prioritize. But the best officers were the ones that could look at a situation and realize this is how we've got to do this. We have got to fix this. Or maybe it was about judgment of people. How good were they at judging others? So judgment was first and foremost in my mind what I was looking for. Secondly, was selflessness. I have zero interest in anybody that promotes themselves. I mean, in the service, but also in any business. Nobody wants to be around somebody that goes around talking about what they did, how good they are. I always preferred being around and promoting people who were selfless, that went out of their way to help their teammate, even at some cost to themselves. That was what I respected, and those were the kind of leaders I thought that the Army needed to have. And then finally, it's a personality thing, but it's really kind of a combination of a mental toughness and sense of humor. Because no matter what business you're in, it's not just military, but it's the ability to deal with adversity. I mean, not every day is going to be a banner day. I mean, you're going to have some really, really bad days, whether it's, a massive loss or some kind of setback, or candidly, you have a helicopter goes down and you lose 5, 6, 7 soldiers all at once. I can remember exactly where I was on 3 or 4 things that happened in Afghanistan and Iraq, where we lost several soldiers in one incident. It's gut wrenching, but you have to keep moving forward because the mission is still there to be done. Yes. And so having the mental toughness to be able to kind of keep working through that. And soldiers are so good at humor because of over the centuries, whether they're out in the crappy weather or, sitting in a trench or in a bunker or freezing weather or incredibly hot weather, away from families. And so the humor that is generated by young soldiers and sergeants and young lieutenants is always the best humor there is. And I really miss that, by the way.
So I heard judgment, selflessness, and if I could call it grit or persistent, right? Just like, I'm going to quit, and you think about back on mission command, judgment for sure, right? I mean, that's got to be the tall pole in the tent, is you've got good judgment to be able to make a decision on the fly when a good decision is what's called for, right? And what's for the best of everybody. Go ahead, please.
Well, just, the judgment comes from understanding what's going on around you. So being able to take in lots of things that are happening very fast. And by the way, you'll never have perfect information. You could have a gymnasium full of computers. You're not going to have perfect information. That's the nature of war. There's too many factors out there that influence it. So being able to pick through all that and say, okay, I think we found a gap. I think we found a weakness here, or this is a real danger. It's not visible, but I can sense that it's coming. These are the kind of things where you have to have judgment, and that comes. You're partly born with it, but mainly it comes from experience.
And it's interesting too, because that notion of imperfect information, war or otherwise, we always live in a world of imperfect information. And, it's an easy out to not take a decision or do an action because, well, sorry, I didn't have enough information. I didn't know this. I didn't know that. Well, Bob, I needed you to make a decision based on what you did know, not what you didn't know at the time. Right. So that to me speaks to judgment, ownership, right? Not being afraid to fail. I'm going to make a decision and I'm going to stand by it and take my licks if that's what comes afterwards. But in the moment, this was the best I knew how to do with what I had to work with. And no complaining, we're going to go.
Yeah, you have to breed a culture in your organization that, first of all, expects success. And so I would always take opportunities to tell my leaders and say, look, I don't do too many guarantees. I guarantee you're not going to have enough resources to do everything I'm going to ask you to do. But we are still going to expect you to be successful. And and I'm going to do all I can to help you be successful. And I know you're going to make some mistakes along the way, but I'm going to be there with you, and I'm going to protect you. And by the way, you can be sure in 38 years, I had a lot of people protecting me and picking up my broken glass. I can vividly remember standing in front of my battalion commander. I was a lieutenant in Germany. I'd been there about 2 months. This is spring of 81. And the battalion commander was a tough old guy, had commanded 3 different companies in Vietnam, been wounded multiple times. This was a tough dude. And he was trying to help rebuild the Army after the catastrophe of Vietnam and the immediate aftermath. And there had been a rash of bad things happening. So he had sacked, my company commander, 2 other lieutenants, a top NCO, and some others. And then I get a call from the adjutant, and he says, "Hey, Hodges, Cole Steele," that was the nickname of the battalion commander, "Cole Steele wants to see you." And I thought, I've only been here 2 months, and I'm already gone. So I go jogging up to the headquarters, and I report to him, said, "Sir, Lieutenant Hodges, you wanted to see me." He goes, and he didn't say, "Have a seat, Ben." He left me standing at attention in front of his desk. He said, "Yes, Lieutenant Hodges, one day I think you might be a pretty good officer, but right now you're headed down the wrong damn path." And I was like, "Sir, what do you mean?" He said, your platoon, my 30 soldiers, that's not a ball club. Your job is to make sure that they are trained and ready. That's the best way to take care of them. And you understand it, and you can be sure there was a little bit more color in how he said that. And I said, "Yes, sir, I do." He said, "Well, get the hell out of my office." And that was a life. Obviously, it's a life memory for me because I can remember it so vividly. But there's a guy, he saw something in me, even though I'd only been a lieutenant in his big battalion for 2 months. And he thought, all right, I'm going to keep him, and let's see if we can make something out of him. And that's been my experience all the years, where everywhere I went, where, of course, I got scuffed up by different commanders. But they would say, "All right, get back in there."
Yeah. Well, so I want to be very mindful of the time because I know you've got a call coming at the top of the hour. Do you mind sharing with the audience just a little bit about your rock collection and maybe one that's really special to you?
So that guy, Colonel Powell, I started my rock collection because of him. He was a kind of a history guy, and he had found a memorial in the Ardennes where a lieutenant of the United States Army had been killed in December of 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge. Lieutenant Eric Fisher Wood. This guy was a football player from Princeton University. His father was a general, and Lieutenant Wood was an artillery, a lieutenant in the artillery there in one of the units that was right at the point where the German counteroffensive in December 44 had hit, and the whole unit was wiped out. It was a disaster for the United States Army at that time, as most people are familiar with the Battle of the Bulge. And thousands of American soldiers killed, captured, ran away. Lieutenant Wood, however, kept up the fight. And for about the next 10 days, he was on his own, killing German stragglers, keeping up the fight, causing problems in the German rear lines, and trying to get American troops back together. Eventually, Lieutenant Wood was surrounded and killed, and the Belgians found his remains, and they erected a monument to this young American soldier. So my battalion commander knew the story, found the place, and picked up 30 rocks from the site of that monument, and came back and gave one to every lieutenant in the battalion and said, "That's what I expect of you. In the absence of orders, figure out what your orders should be and go do it." So I've had that rock on my, with me ever since then. Of course, that would be 1982. And so then the idea of telling stories was more effective if you wanted people to remember something. I think we all remember stories better than we do. "I want you to do this," and so that's where the idea for the rocks came from. I've already mentioned the Washington's Crossing and now I'm so twisted. Everywhere I go, I think, well, there must have been something really cool that happened here. I got to find a rock from that place, and so it has driven my research. And of course, I have one from the Alamo. Now, by the way, the rock has to be an eyewitness rock. I need to be sure that rock was there, and well, you can be sure though, at the Alamo, which is now in the middle of downtown San Antonio, there's no rocks laying around on the ground that would have been there at the time. So my choice was to chip off a piece of the old Alamo, which I would still be in jail if that had happened. So I had to settle for a piece of gravel at that time. But this is no kidding, an actual rock. This one is from the Battle of Waterloo, Hougoumont Farm, which is on Napoleon's or Wellington's right flank. At this small group of British soldiers, if they had failed there, if Napoleon had been able to turn Wellington's right flank, it'd have been a whole different outcome. But this group hung in there all day long and changed the outcome. And so I thought, here's a group of soldiers, a small group that changed the outcome of one of the biggest battles in European history. So those are the kind of things I do. I've got probably 250.
Oh, goodness.
I think my kids are worried that they're going to get stuck with them when I'm gone. So.
No, that's awesome. I'm very mindful of the time because I know that you do have a call coming up right after this. So I just say thank you very, very much. I mean, what I've learned today around responsibility, accountability, integrity, judgment, selflessness. I mean, these are the kinds of lessons that I was hoping that you would be able to share with folks because while you've learned them in the context of the military, where again, the stakes could never be higher, they're very, very applicable to civilian life, business life, our families. I mean, it's just really, really applicable lessons. So thank you for your service. Thank you for the time that you spent with us today. And I just really appreciate having you on.
Well, what a privilege. And I can't imagine a better job than what you're doing is helping leaders become better leaders. So and helping people find jobs. So thanks, Bob.
Joy. Okay, thank you. Bless you. Thank you, and thank you for everything you're doing, trying to make Ukraine a safe situation for everyone. So, bless.